So
welcome, everyone. I hope your company meetings have been going well. Just still waiting for about half the students to join in from their rooms. So give it another minute. All right, there we are. So I hope you guys all had some really awesome meetings. I'm really looking forward to watching all of your guys' marketing challenge videos today. We have a representative here from Crimson Education to speak with us, and the student introducing him is Wesley from Company F. Wesley, take it away.
All right. So based in LA, Bill Saad is joining us from Crimson Education. Crimson Education's mission is to remove barriers of geography and legacy and to see all students reach their greatest potential thanks to the dedication of their personalized Crimson teams. Bilal's dual degrees in both marketing and linguistics from the University of Texas at Austin has allowed him to combine these two skills and passions in a career dedicated to helping students around the world. Bilal has taught ESL in small towns and villages in Southeast Asia and in the Middle East. He also had a wider impact by reaching out to thousands of students through big and established educational institutes around the globe. He has worked for large metropolitan cities such as Dubai, Los Angeles, Dallas, and Austin, where the reach to students is limitless. Aside from education, Bilal has a deep interest in health and wellness and acquired multiple certificates and licenses in personal training and sports sciences. Helping people is something that is intertwined with his personal happiness and sense of fulfillment. In addition, very impressive, he speaks 4 languages. That's pretty cool. So without further ado, Bilal Saad.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the kind intro, Wesley. Sorry, my computer froze at the worst time, so I was about to unmute and it was just lagging. But it's really nice to meet everyone. Basically, piggybacking by some of what he said just now, in case I'm speaking super fast, let me know. I just had a kind of monster and I'm about to go work out after this session. So if I am speaking super fast, just let me know in the chat. But basically, yeah, everything that we said, I'm an academic advisor at Crimson, and I've been with Crimson Education for 3 years. So before Crimson, I used to be a teacher. And I love making sure that this conversation is very individualized and that everyone is participating and asking questions. So completely feel free to kind of intervene or interject at any time. I also like sharing my screen and going through a presentation, but I don't want to stick to it, okay? So if you guys have questions about any slides or any particular information that leads to a different topic, feel free to ask me, okay? You guys can raise your hand in the reactions here, and then if I notice it, I'll try to answer the question there. So I'm gonna share my screen and I'll take you through a little bit about today's topic. Can you guys see my screen? Katie, can you confirm? Perfect, thank you so much. Alrighty, so basically, I think Wesley, you've summarized it really well, what our mission statement is as Crimson Education. So I'm not gonna stop here for too long. I wanna focus on the juicy, meaty stuff of our topic today, which is about how to stand out in high school. Again, a little bit more of my background that Wesley did a really good job introducing. I actually had some goosebumps. That was really good, Wesley. All right, so let's go to the agenda for today. So the topic is how to stand out in high school or within high school, right? And the end goal of this conversation is to eventually stand out within the college application. I know that that's not your end goal individually, but that's one of the biggest goals that we have for our students to eventually set them up for their own goals. So all of you might have different goals, right? Like a student X, my goal is to go to a top university. Student B, my goal is to work at Google. Student C, my goal is to get a really good scholarship and not pay a dime for college. It really depends. Everyone has a different goal. No judging here, safe space. Our job at Crimson Education is to make sure that we support those, but it all starts with the application. So throughout high school, we're focusing on preparing you for this college application. So I'm going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how to spend your time within high school, setting yourself up for success in high school, and then some student stories and Q&A, okay? Please don't stick to the Q&A section at the end. If you have any questions throughout, feel free to ask me. I'm probably not going to see any hands being written during this presentation because of the screen share. So Katie, please let me know if you see any. I have a limited view right now. All right, so what does the application look like? So basically, we're talking about US universities. So Crimson Education, we are a global company and we help students apply to the top universities worldwide. And top universities are mostly in the US and in the UK. So we do have students aiming for the UK, but that's a conversation for a separate day. Let's talk about the US. Most of us are aiming for the US probably. So the US universities are looking for a student that is able to demonstrate those two words in red, vitality and leadership, okay? So you basically want to show that you are this person that has exhausted the resources around them and is able to show leadership. How can you do that? You do it through 3 different columns, okay, or pillars that we are showing here in a pie. Basically, you have the academics, you have your extracurriculars and leadership, and you have your application. So again, to tie that back with the 2 red words, vitality and leadership, right? You can show that through these 3 things over here. So academics, that plays 40% of a role in this formula. So 40% of the decision from any university in the US comes from your academics. There are small differences between one university or another. Like some universities focus more on academia, other schools focus more on leadership. But in general, the rough average of all the universities in the US, that's what you get. So academics 40%, 30% extracurriculars and leadership, and then we call that ECL at Crimson. And then your application is another 30%. So I like to think of this whole process, the 3-4 years of high school, as a storybook. So you have this book that has 2 main chapters in it, the academics and then the ECL. But the book itself is your application. So that's another 30%. So the publisher of the book, what it smells like, all those things are your application, if that makes any sense, okay? So we need to focus on all these 3 things basically in order for us to be successful within our goals for top universities in the US. So basically those 4 years of work will all be consolidated into 4 minutes or like 5-6 minutes at best. That's how much time an admission officer would give to review your application. I don't know if any of you have guessed that before, but a lot of people think that colleges would spend a lot of time looking at your application. It actually is just minutes. And that's because the process is streamlined. So how can you spend your time in high school? Actually, before I do that, anyone has any questions on any of these? No, okay, so if you have any questions and you want to save them for later, we can do that as well. And then just a quick note here, something that I've noticed throughout the last 3 years with Crimson is that a lot of students that aim for top universities specifically, like let's say Stanford. Katie, go ahead.
Yeah, it looks like Jerry has a question.
All right.
Okay, so within the academics field, is there any difference between how AP, IB are weighted?
Very good question. Thank you so much, Jerry. And I was just about to say something along those lines. In the academics, it's very, very hard to demonstrate uniqueness because believe it or not, like Stanford, for example, all the applicants that come to Stanford, they are all very well qualified academically. So all of them are kind of similar. There will be a bunch of Jerrys that are aiming for Stanford that have the exact same academics. So to answer your question more directly, between IB and AP, it really depends on how well you do rather than just IB and AP, because you can make a curriculum and not do so well, and then the AP student would have an upper hand. So the competitiveness comes from how well you perform, but also the rigor. So that's a very good question. But yeah, academics, like as I was saying, there's only so much you can do to demonstrate uniqueness. Most of the uniqueness usually comes from the second one, from the extracurriculars and leadership. I hope that answers your question, Jerry. Thank you for the question. Cool.
It looks like Vincent has a question now.
Go ahead, Vincent. Yeah.
So is this information coming from like past people who've worked at the admissions?
Yeah, good question, Vincent. So yeah, this information comes from that partially and also comes from our data. So we are a data-driven company like any other tech company right now, right? And basically we keep track of our trends. So we use a combination of both. We use like AI and data, and we also use the human touch. The human touch is what you're asking about, the former admission officers, and we have a bunch of those at Crimson. My favorite one that I love talking to all the time, his name is Martin, and he was the ex-director of admissions at Stanford. A lot of the information that I'm coding about Stanford is from Martin because I have a close relationship with him. But basically, yeah, all of that information from admission officers alongside our data equals this, if that makes any sense. But yeah, very good question, Vincent. I hope I answered it. Any other questions, you guys? No. Okay. So let's go to the next part. So now we're talking about how you can spend time in high school more effectively. So basically, remember I said that there's only so much you can do within the academics to stand out. One of the best way that you can stand out within the academics is through your academic curiosity, or we call it intellectual curiosity. So this doesn't mean that you don't need all the other stuff. You still need a very good GPA, you need a good SAT score, you need to take the right classes, the right curricular rigor. Those things are kind of like an obvious given, right? But the thing is that when a lot of competitive students already have that, it becomes really hard to choose someone based off of academics. Then that's when the academic curiosity comes into play. So what does it mean? It basically means, Vincent, you're, let's say, interested in, let's say, computer science. You're so interested in computer science that you have went above and beyond and took some computer science classes from universities without considering if it's for credit or not. You're just taking it because you're hungry for knowledge, or you're attending summer programs, or you're pursuing some kind of research in computer science. That's what they call academic curiosity. Cool. So also, you always should confirm the choice of your future college major and try to see if it aligns with the classes that you're taking. Because that's also part of your academic profile. So which classes am I taking? So if I'm taking a lot of, like, let's say, history classes and language classes, and then suddenly say I'm applying for engineering, it doesn't make sense, even if I was a top student in those classes. Cool. So let's go to the next one, extracurriculars. So the two things that they look for in your profile. So remember that storybook? Now we're in the ECL chapter. The first thing that they look for is breadth and depth. So they want to see that you were able to try a bunch of different things and you were able to explore. So the breadth comes from your exploration, right? So I'm someone that is, like, let's say in my case, I studied linguistics, but a lot of the stuff that I did in high school didn't really relate to linguistics. Linguistics was a big part of it, was a big part of my story, but I also did like sports. I was part of FBLA, stuff like that. So when you have not a very wide range, just a few supporting activities to demonstrate your leadership and to demonstrate that you've explored, your depth is the most important thing that they're looking for. So your depth needs to tie with your passion. It needs to tie with what you want to do. Wesley, I've just met you before this call, right? And then you told me a little bit about your business idea, but I can already guess that your passion is around something around like AI and biology, computer science, along those lines. Am I correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So, and the reason why I was able to guess that is because when you explained to me your business idea and your initiative, it tied really well with computer science. It tied with business because it's a business idea, but it also has a lot of like biology involved in it, right? You were telling me about cortisone levels and so on. So from your activity, if you're telling me you're aiming for those majors, from a standpoint of a university, it makes sense. But if you suddenly tell me that I'm gonna aim for, let's say, economics, I'm like, wait, I need to see more of your profile because that initiative does not equal economics, right? So it's kind of like that, that's the depth. So I think that's a very good, like, best way I can put it. So you also want to begin to narrow what you enjoy towards later stages of high school. So around 10th to 11th grade, that's when the exploration should tone down and your depth should increase. And then lastly, you want to have a tangible impact. This is the one where a lot of our students struggle with. So the students that typically get college counseling, especially private college counseling, they are already very strong. Most of them are. Some of them are not, but some of them are very strong. And they come to us because they're doing too much and they feel like they're still lost. And a lot of their energy is not really doesn't have a good return on their investment. So what we help them with, obviously with all the other obvious stuff, I will tell you about that later, but one of the key things is measuring your impact. So when you work on your college application after junior year, and part of the comment out there is an area for your activities. It's kind of like your resume. I'm sure some of you are probably familiar with it. And that area is limited on characters, on how to describe it. So what ends up happening is that you start thinking about, okay, I was part of FBLA. I've been part of FBLA for 2 years. How am I going to describe FBLA to Stanford right now in my college application? If you talk about what FBLA is, zero, that's bad. That's a red flag because Stanford knows what FBLA is, so you can't say that. So then you have to talk about what you've done through FBLA in your school. And then you start thinking about all the awards that you've won or didn't win or you were close to winning. But again, those things are already highlighted in your award section. So how do I write something here that's about impact? That's a problem. So if you haven't measured it down, if you haven't wrote down in your notes that on September 4th, a part of FBLA, I was able to do this cool thing. And really, they didn't give me an award for it, but I was able to do this cool thing. I've increased the attendance. So I've made the class stay 10 minutes longer on average every time they show up because I was adding more feedback. Whatever, that's the type of impact that you want to write in your college application. Cool, so another thing that you can also do to set yourself up for success is through these things, jobs, internships, and research. So especially for the UCs, UCLA, UC Berkeley, they have a section in their college application where they say, you have a paid job experience and what have you done with the money if it was paid. So these things will definitely show responsibility, show that you can stand out, and the fact that you've utilized your skills in a company, even if it's a startup, no problem. Any questions here? I just did see a notification. I'm not sure if it was a question. No, okay. Cool. So summer camps and programs, especially for your junior year summer, that one they will look at macroscopically. Go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, it looks like Nora has a question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so like about your previous slide, you talked a lot about like internships, especially during like this pandemic because of COVID-19. It's really hard to find some. So I was wondering, how would one exactly go about that?
That's a great question, Nora, and I love your name, by the way. That's my mom's name. Okay, so internships, basically, because of the pandemic, yes, it's hard to find them. You just have to keep on trying. And then the other option is obviously getting help from professionals. So like Crimson Education, even if you're not part of our full college counseling program, we still help students that are just looking for internships. And we help them by pairing them with the right internships. It needs to be the right internship, not just an internship. So if you're interested in the medical space, it would make sense that that internship is in that realm rather than doing something completely random, because the internship needs to demonstrate that you're utilizing the skills that you want to highlight in that company. So it naturally needs to click with the major, right? So yeah, so you can always get help from Crimson, but the other option is to keep on trying and try different things. Try reaching out directly to employees at companies through LinkedIn, through Facebook, instead of just directly reaching out to just like through their contact us for a company, because that might not work. So there are a bunch of options there. Cool.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but how do you get help through Crimson? Like, I think I'm very much interested in that. So if you could touch on that later, it would be great.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you hang on until the end of the webinar, I'll have a link for all of you to kind of like book a one-on-one meeting with me. It's free. And basically that one-on-one meeting is about 30 minutes long, where I get to talk about your profile. I get to talk about what you've done in high school, review it, and then tell you, hey, what are your chances to whatever university you're aiming for? I can give you like some initial feedback. And then from there, that initially starts the next steps if you're interested to join Crimson as an official student. So I'll leave that link in the towards the end of this webinar. Thank you so much for bringing that up, Noor. Cool. So go
Vincent,
ahead.
did you have another question?
Yeah. So like, do you have to join clubs? Because I've like in like freshman year joined clubs and I didn't feel like I belonged in them, because like it was just a bunch of like information which you can really learn yourself. Like, and so like I didn't like do any clubs.
Yeah, that's a good concern, and it's a good point. So you don't have to join a club. It's not a requirement, but you still have to show all those things that I've told you about, right? Like to show that you have leadership and to show that you have the vitality and you exhausted your resources. Typically, things are done in a club setting, but it doesn't have to be done in a club. It could be done through your own organization or something, right? Do you have anything like that, Vincent?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so we can definitely talk about that more in the one-on-one, but very good question. No, it does not have to be in a club. Cool. Alrighty, so we've talked about summer programs. Volunteering is something that a lot of parents usually mention, old school mentality. Like, My son volunteers 60 hours, right? So yeah, volunteering helps. Volunteering is good. I don't want to discourage you from volunteering, but it's only one part of your story. It's if you have done it and it clicks with what you want to do in college, or it clicks with who you are, volunteer is great. But relying completely on volunteering is not the goal. Okay, so it would be awesome if you have some volunteering hours, help your community, exhausted the resources there, but don't do that too much. Test preparation. So this usually falls in the academic realm, but again, because you're preparing for high school and it's not a linear process. You're not doing things in sections. Everything happens at the same time. You want to make sure you plan things correctly and nothing falls through the cracks, right? So with test prep, a lot of times this should happen, from my opinion, towards the summer after 10th grade. I think that's the best time. But don't worry, if you haven't taken it yet and you're beyond the 10th grade mark, that's okay. You can still take it in 11th grade. But ideally, I feel like when you're planning things ahead, it should happen in 10th grade, because then if you haven't gotten the desired score that you want, then at least you have time to prep again and take it again in junior year. So that's the ideal world. You want to make sure which one is better for you, ACT or SAT. Thank God SAT subject tests are no longer part of the equation, so that's gone. So SAT, ACT, make sure you take a practice test in both before you commit to one of them, and see if which one is better for you. It's all about gut feeling. The most common question that I get here is, which one is better for Stanford? Which one is better for Harvard? There is no better. It's basically which one you scored higher on. So find out which one is best for you. Katie, did we have a question?
Yep, Nor, I think I saw your hand first, and then Jerry after her.
Okay.
So SAT wise, I was wondering, do you have any recommendations for like any textbooks?
Not necessarily for textbooks. Sorry, I can't think of names off the top of my mind, but I can look up some, and if we are part of the one-on-one conversation, then I can definitely give you some resources that I would recommend. But yeah, definitely
Okay.
try to use all the free resources that are available. There are a lot of practice tests online. Cool. And then there was another question as well.
I think Katie said my name next. Okay, so I have I had two questions. So first of all, would you say that the summer between freshman year and sophomore year would be a decent year for taking a standardized test?
If you feel like you're confident with your scores, I would definitely take a practice test at home and just assess. If, like, let's say SAT, for example, if you're getting like an 1100 or 1200 on the practice test, then maybe you should study more and not waste your time taking the real test, right? But if you're getting, like, let's say a 1400 at this stage on the practice test, then yeah, study a little bit and then you can take it that early.
All right. I forgot my second question. Can you come back to me?
Yeah, for sure, Jerry. Take your time. Okay, good. So let's go to the next one. Oh, by the way, if any of you are aiming for top 20 universities in the US, the scores that are ideal through these two tests, 1500 on the SAT out of a 1600, and a 33 above on the ACT out of a 3600. 3600, no, just 36. So 33 out of a 36. I have a question for all of you. Let's see who can answer it. What is a big difference between the SAT and ACT besides the scores that I just mentioned? Anyone?
Okay, well, from what I've noticed from taking both is that the time limits on the ACT are much tougher. For example, the reading section, there's 75 questions in 45 minutes. And also the math section of the ACT is more rigorous. And I think the biggest difference is that there's a science section in the ACT that is not in the SAT.
Very good, Jerry. So yeah,
those are the three main differences I found.
Those are the three that I always highlight too. So that's a really good observation. Yeah, the biggest one is that there's a science section in the ACT. The SAT only has math and English. And then the ACT is a little bit tougher with the timing per question, but it has fewer questions. So it kind of evens out in the end. So those are the two major ones. And Jerry also mentioned the third one. So thank you, Jerry. Katie, do we have one more question?
We have two more, Wumi and then Vincent.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so my question was, I'm sorry, I forgot.
You're good. I love your background, by the way.
Thank you.
Okay, so you want us to come back to you? Let's go to Vincent first.
Yeah.
Okay,
I was
perfect. So-
wondering if you should still take the SAT if they say that it's test optional.
Yes, especially if you're aiming for like top 50 below universities, we would recommend it. And this is based off of our, remember the data that I told you before, we track data?
Yeah.
So this last year, the COVID year, we've noticed that most of the students that got accepted to their top choices have taken the SAT, even though the schools were optional.
Well, this year, like, I couldn't find any space. Like, what if like my score is a little lower because I didn't have like enough time? Because the only time like you're able to, because like in Washington State, all the test centers were closed. So, would it be possible like just to submit like a lower score, but like because I only have one chance to take it because like the test
Are you
centers
a
were
rising
closed.
senior, Vincent?
Yeah.
Okay. We should definitely talk. Like I said, that call is complimentary, so we can talk about those things. But you can go either way. This is a very like specific question to you, and I'm happy to answer it in that one-on-one. So book it immediately after this call, and we can maybe chat tomorrow, and I'll give you a very detailed answer. Okay? Because both ways seem plausible. Wilmy, do you remember your question?
Yes, I do. Do you have any like preferred modes of studying for the tests?
Prefer modes. What do you mean by that?
But like, is it like just working on the subjects that will be on the test or just taking multiple tests? Like, what is it like?
Oh yeah, so like the studying style, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically it would really depend on your first diagnostic test, the practice test, right? So when you take that, you get a lot of data. So what was the biggest problem when you took it? If there is a problem, right? So is it because of English or math? Now, is my problem with the test taking coming from a concept problem? So do I need to learn the concepts? Then we would recommend that you buy books and learn, right? But is it a test management problem? So managing the time, skimming through questions, all those test techniques, there are so many. I used to teach TOEFL and IELTS, they're international tests for English, and a lot of students that aim for US universities, they fail those tests or just don't get a good score. But when you speak to them, they're fluent in English, and their test problems are always about like where to look, finding the right information, and all that, right? So it really depends on what is your weakness, and then you have to adapt and come up with a study plan. We do have one-on-one tutoring, by the way. So if you're interested in that, again, I highly recommend that you book that free meeting, okay?
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
Cool. You're welcome, Umi. Okay. Let's go to the next slide real quick. I want to cover as much as we can because we have about, I think we have another.
You have about another half hour.
Okay, perfect. So let's cover as much as we can and get more questions. So these are really good questions. Okay, school research. This is where we are super clutch when we help our clients. So basically, it's about shortlisting your schools, right? So when you come up with your final list, I'm sure all of you are aware with like safety schools, reach schools, and target schools. So you have your list and you're aiming for these universities. When you are working on the applications, you want to personalize them to every school. So for example, you want to understand what are the institutional priorities of that school. For example, Stanford, what is Stanford looking for? And then the University of Washington, what are they looking for? And then you want to change your story or the angle of your story and highlight it in a way that would click with the university. So that means when you write the essays, you need to fit what the university is looking for. Because like I said, going back to that Stanford example, when the students get rejected, majority of them are qualified. Actually, all of them are qualified academically. They're all strong. They all have 1450, 1500 SAT score and everything else. So when they get rejected, it's because they just don't fit the university. There's no like match between them. It's kind of like when you see in like those romantic movies and they say, it's not me, it's you during a breakup. It's one of those, right? And the students are actually very strong. So this is, like I said, this is where we're super helpful and clutch. So we research which schools are best for you. You can try to do this too, but naturally, like when you do it with experts, it's a little bit different. So when you make that list, you want to make sure that you are not wasting your time. If you're aiming for a school that does not look for someone that is funny, don't aim for that school because you're a funny guy. UChicago is one of those, right? So unless you feel like you can really show how serious you are to UChicago and how committed you are. But that's what I mean by the fit, right? So we research all of that. We look at the institutional priorities, and then we help you apply to these universities based off of fit. Otherwise, you'd be wasting a lot of your time working on these applications and then knowing that you're probably not going to get accepted. So why did I waste all that time working on the application? Or if I didn't waste time, that means I didn't really work on a very solid application, because the applications are very lengthy. Okay, and I'm referring to the supplementary essays and the main essays. I'm going to skip over the trade schools. So what is your ROI on attending a college? ROI is return on your investment, right? I'm sure all of you are familiar with that. So basically, the main one that stands out to me out of these over here, I'm going to have you guys just look at them and read them. I won't cover all of them, but the one that stands out to me the most is that when I go to a top university, it puts me one step closer towards my dream, which is basically, let's say, a higher salary, or let's say it's working at Google, for example. If I want to work at Google, then naturally, if I go to a top university, my chances are higher. You don't have to go to a top university to work at Google, but my chances are higher, right? So those are like, that's the one that really stands out to me the most, but every student has a different answer. So for some students, going to a top university means that they give you a more generous financial aid offer. Typically they do. Or I have access to a larger network, especially if you're interested in business. So all of you business major minded students, the biggest thing you're looking for in those schools is the network, because business means that you're going to be successful if you have a wide network or not. So typically you would notice that liberal arts colleges, they don't have business programs. So I'm sure you guys are familiar with liberal arts colleges, right? They're smaller. They're more like close-knit. You work one-on-one with the teacher, and they're really good for like practical stuff, like let's say the sciences or some arts. But for business, you'll notice that UCLA and those types of huge institutions are better, because you get to know so many people, you get to work with so many people and collaborate. Any questions here, you guys? No? Okay. Cool, we can always come back to this. So application preparation, basically you're going to be using some of these. So the most common one is the common application, no pun intended. So basically the common application is the one that has the most universities there, but it's not the only one you're going to be using most likely, because if you're aiming for the UCs, like UCLA, UC Berkeley, they're separate. They're on the UC application. MIT is on a separate application. UT Austin is on a separate application. So some schools are separate, but majority, all the other schools are on the common application. So 99% of the students are going to be using the common app. That's why we talk about it the most. There are different rounds. There's the early round and there's the regular round. I'm talking about the deadlines. So if you apply by the early deadline, you typically have better chances than the regular round. There are restrictions, so that's something that we can talk about if you have questions about it. The UCAS, anyone knows what that is? UCAS, can anyone guess? UCAS is the UK application. So if you're aiming for Oxford or Cambridge, basically the UCAS, the biggest difference with the UCAS is that it only has a limit of 5 universities that you can apply to. So you can't apply to more than 5 for the UK. And if you want to aim for Cambridge or Oxford, they're enemies. So you can't aim for both. You have to choose one. You can't apply to both of them. Cool. Setting yourself up for success, part 3. So one of the best ways we feel like you can define your success through high school is through entrepreneurship. So entrepreneurship versus entrepreneurship. Basically, either one of these routes is a strong route. Okay, so if you want to choose one or you want to mix the two, whatever works best for you. But basically, this is the flavor of your profile. Okay, so are you an entrepreneur or entrepreneur? So basically, entrepreneurship, you guys are familiar with it. You start something from scratch. You have that mind that always wants to start stuff. I know a few of you here that are like that. You want to start a company, a nonprofit organization, and you're always thinking about what's next, and you're just growing it, right? It's very important with this one to measure impact and scaling, because it's so easy to lose track of that. Entrepreneurship is basically when you join something that is already existing. So you're not starting something from scratch. You're not starting something new. You're part of FBLA that is already in your school. Is that bad? No. Can that be your main depth? Yes, it can be. But basically, you're choosing the route of entrepreneurship. And for that one, you want to scale things. You want to scale the club. You want to get it to a higher level. You don't want to be just another Bilal that was part of FBLA and kind of followed the footsteps. No, now you're part of FBLA, but you've made it bigger, stronger, wider reach. So even working within a nonprofit can be considered as entrepreneurship. So these are mainly like the two flavors that students go with when it comes to like the theme of their profile. And these are the ones that stand out the most for colleges. They look for that. So I'm going to skip over this. It's very lengthy. Let's talk about entrepreneurship a little bit more, because I feel like it clicks well with a lot of you over here. Here are some things that you can do through entrepreneurship. So show your curiosity. Even if you want to do like some kind of a research with a professor remotely, something like that, show that you're hungry for more knowledge. That again ties well with the intellectual curiosity that I talked about. So you want to write. Writing is a good additional skill to have. If you can join writing competitions, essay competitions, there are so many competitions out there that are even global that a lot of us just don't know about because we don't hear about global stuff. So there are some competitions offered by Oxford and Cambridge or in New Zealand or Australia. And you can just join these competitions from home if you're a good writer. You can get a good placement and then you can put that as part of your awards on the Common App. Think about potential careers because that ties well with your goals. So is my goal to work at Google, or is it to go to Stanford, or is it to get postgraduate degree, or is it to get a scholarship? You wouldn't know that if you're just sitting at home. So contact people, try to see what opportunities exist out there. Personal projects, this is the most obvious one for entrepreneurship. So if you start something that's your own, then that's the best. A good example is starting your own app. If you're in the Bay Area in San Francisco, starting an app is not enough because every kid there has an app. So it really depends on where you're from and the area that the amount of like impact that is there. So don't compare yourself to students from a different area that have different resources. Here are some few examples of things that you can do when it comes to showing entrepreneurship. So designing, launching an app, we've talked about that, building a career, mentoring database, writing an entrepreneurship book, starting a STEM nonprofit. So these examples, I feel like they're very generic. Let me give you a real life example from Crimson, okay? So we have one student, her name was Elaine. She allowed us to use her name. We are not allowed to use students' name unless they give us a permission. Basically, Elaine is one of the students that I first talked to when I joined Crimson 3 years ago. And she joined Crimson, I believe she was about to finish sophomore year. She's from Southern California and Asian American female student. Basically, when she joined Crimson, she mentioned that she eventually wants to be a doctor down the line. She doesn't care about how she wants to become a doctor, but she knows that she wants to go to med school. And the other passion that she had was writing. She was a very good writer. She was part of some good like essay competitions and so on. Basically, I want to tie her like background that I gave you with her projects. Okay, that's the gist of my story. But basically, what happened was that when she came to Crimson and we looked at her profile, she had like some of the exploration part, like the activities that she'd done, so some clubs here and there and so on. And two things stood out. She was a good writer through those competitions, and she basically was part of this volunteer program at her local hospital for children, where she helped them like read storybooks. So it was a reading program for children. Those were the two things that she's done. Came to us, has some high goals, wants to go to med school. So when we started thinking about how to demonstrate her entrepreneurship and launch her own like initiative or organization, so we were basically working on something along this or this, these two things. So mostly like starting a nonprofit, right? So we were like, what can we do that combines medicine and your talent for writing? And then when she mentioned that volunteer program with kids, we were like, okay, that's a good idea. Let's have a twist on it. Instead of a reading program that you just volunteered in, how about you launch your own program at a hospital? Not instead of volunteering, this is your own, and it will be a writing program for these children. So you go and you help those children write a book since you're so good at writing. She said, great, I love the idea. We kind of hooked her up with some hospitals through partnerships, and she went there, did it, liked it. Now it became about how can we scale this? How can we make it bigger? Because you doing it once is not enough. That's just a test. So then she started recruiting other students. They started doing the same thing. And then she started recruiting students from all over the country. And for that, she had to partner with other hospitals from other parts of the country that are closer to those students. And then those students would volunteer under her organization. And the organization's name was Story Wish. And eventually they even partnered with a publisher, and they would actually publish the book, and the child is the author. So they send the hard copy to the child too. So that was her whole organization from 10th grade all the way to senior year. That's how long it took her, which is a long time. And she started with baby steps with the trials and the tests, and eventually grew it slowly, and got to a decent level. She's at U Chicago right now, and she's studying biology. And she's on track to become a doctor. Obviously, biology is a pre-med major. So that's a real life example that I can give you of one of my students. Do you guys have any questions on this?
Yes, it looks like Vincent has a question.
But like I feel like I've been told that like if you just do things just to get into college, it's bad. Like you shouldn't just do something just because of college, right? You should do something that you like. But like like if you create your whole organization just because you want to get into this college or be like stand out, I don't know, like it doesn't feel right.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. If the colleges sniff that you've done something for the sake of the application or college, that's not going to look good. And believe me, they're really good at finding this stuff. They're good at reading essays and finding out who's doing something that's fake and who's doing something that's real. So that's why when, like in going back to Elaine's example, we didn't try to support her with something random. We dug and investigated into what she's passionate about, right? And she was truly passionate about writing, and she was truly passionate about helping children because of that volunteer program. So for her, it made complete sense to do a volunteer program at reading. She's a good writer. Now the next step is I'm going to do a writing program that's my own. So
Does she like still do the organization, or is it? Does she still like participate in the organization?
Yeah, she has to. She has to do all the footwork. So when we help our students, we provide them mentorship. We tell them how to do it. We connect them with people. We give them all the resources and tools, right? But the students have to do it. So even if we give you the best counselors and the best tools, if the student is not serious or not putting in the effort, then there will be no results, right? So our whole like college counseling is like coaching. It's like getting a personal trainer or getting a lawyer, but you still have to take the actions. That's why it's real and it's legitimate, and colleges won't call it as something that you've done for the sake of college. It's actually your own passion. So we want to help our students find their passion and then help them by supporting them through a project that is related to it. Cool. That's a very good question, Vincent. Any other questions about this topic, you guys? No? Okay. Cool. So let's go to the link. So basically, here's the link to book that one-on-one session. You can also scan the QR code to chat with us on the WeChat app if you guys are part of that. I'm also personally on WhatsApp and iMessage. So a lot of students that I talk to one-on-one, they get my number, and then they can always reach out to me if they have questions. But basically, I would highly encourage everyone to kind of like go to this link, book ASAP. There's about 75 of you in this room, or 60 plus from last I checked. And basically what happens is when I share the link, everyone starts booking, and then there's no availability for like a few weeks. And by the way, we have a lot of webinars weekly, and the same thing happens with other students from different areas. So basically what I'm trying to say is that the calendar gets booked super fast because it is free, this one-on-one meeting. The steps after that are not free. So what I'm referring to as the steps after that is when Crimson starts helping you. So if you do decide that you want to be officially part of our family and get college counseling, then those steps are not free. Then we talk about what is the best program, what is the best approach, do you need tutoring or not, how much does it cost? So those things obviously are paid service later, but this meeting is free, and that's why it gets booked super fast. So yeah, take advantage of this. I want to tell everyone a little bit about how Crimson works in more detail, but instead of doing that, let's answer some more questions. So anyone has any questions about the admissions process or specific colleges or simply about Crimson education, feel free to do so right now. Cool. Okay, so while everyone is thinking about questions, let me then talk about the Crimson team real quick. So basically the way that it works for us, like the college counseling part of it, I mean, has anyone ever heard of like college counseling, or do you have any friends or family members that has used college counseling? You can just raise your hand. Good, I do see a few, that's good. So you have some exposure to college counseling. So typically for those of you that are like still don't know what it is, the way that it works is that you kind of like your school's college counselor or your school's counselor, imagine having a person that is kind of like that, maybe a little bit stronger or more focused. I wouldn't say stronger, more focused, that is working with you directly, one-on-one, as many times as you need. So instead of meeting them once a month or once every 6 months, like typically the way a school counselor is, this is personalized. This is your own coach, right? So I think the biggest difference between a school counselor and the Crimson counselor is how dedicated they are to our students, because technically these school counselors that you guys work with in your own high schools, they're very strong. But the problem is the student to counselor ratio is so high that the counselor can't really dedicate a lot of time to you. So they end up meeting with you once every few months or so. That's the key thing with Crimson. You have a lot of exposure. Katie, I see that you've unmuted. Do we have questions?
Yes, first Vincent and then Piotr. Sorry if I mispronounced that, after you.
I have a
Okay.
question about academics. Like when they compare your GPA, like do they compare like because it's not fair if they compare like a 3.5 to like a 4.0, right? So do they compare like the people in your high school like
Yeah, they do. So uh, let's take Stanford for an example, as an example again, right? So let's say I'm in a no-name high school in a small town in Illinois, and I apply to Stanford. Stanford probably never heard officially of your high school, but what your school's counselor will do, they will submit like a one pager about the school's data, a breakdown of everything. So Stanford, the regional admission officer from Stanford that is assigned that area, Illinois, for example, will look at that one pager and immediately at a glance will understand the data of that student's school. So they'll know what is the average GPA at that school, what's the highest, what's the lowest, how many APs they take, all those information, they will have that, right? So then first they'll compare you to your school. If you're not a big fish in that small school, then they won't compare you to bigger regional areas, right? They won't compare you to someone in the Bay Area that has access to 17 AP courses, right? So, but if you're doing really well in your area, in your school, then they will compare you to that regional area. Like the admission officers are assigned an area. And again, they won't compare you to Boston, for example, or San Francisco. So you need to focus on doing really well in your school and in your area. But if the student is not doing well there and has a 3.4 GPA, then it probably won't be a good match for
wait,
a
so
top
do they
university.
compare like people with 3.5 GPAs with like other people that have 3.5 GPAs, or they compare like that's what I'm confused about. Like, do they compare people with the same GPAs?
Yes, they do. So from the same school, we're assuming in this hypothetical example, right? If they're in the same school, yes, but as long as both of them are above the requirement of the school they're aiming for. Typically for like, let's say an Ivy League or top university, the requirements are very high. So if you're below that, then naturally, like you look at the website, if you're below the requirements, don't even apply. But if you're at the requirements or higher, then yeah, they would compare you to students that are similar to you and the students that are above than you in your school.
And so the people that like apply to these like top universities, they come from like people who like they get lots of help, right? They don't just like do like the regular and then like they get in. They get like they do like programs like the Crimson and stuff.
Not all of them, but majority do, yes, but not all of
Okay.
them. No, so I don't want to like, I don't like to scare students and say like, hey, if you don't get college counseling, you're never going to make it to top university. That's not how it is, but it definitely helps. It's kind of like personal training. Like let's say you have an ideal like body weight you want to hit, right? Obviously anyone can do that if they have the right information, the right training program and so on. But you might lose some time by learning trial and error and make mistakes. And with losing weight, you obviously have the luxury of time, no problem. But with the college admissions process, there's a deadline. So if you make mistakes, time's up. That's why it's more encouraged to use professional help because you want to meet those deadlines and you want to meet the requirements. But yeah, simple answer for your question is that it is not required, it's highly encouraged. Katie, who else do we
Piotr?
have?
Yeah. Okay, so for people who are trying to apply to the college in US that are not from US, and we in Poland, for example, we don't have SATs. Does the test that we have do even matter, or should we look for some international SAT in Poland? Because I think there are some places when you can write them.
Yeah, for international students, if you can take the test, it's great. SAT, ACT, if you have access to it, it definitely helps your case, especially if you crush the test. If you don't have access to it, then you can take advantage of the test optional. We do have one student, we do have a full office in Russia and Moscow, and one of our students from there, I'm using him as an example, got accepted to NYU without taking any SAT or SAT subject tests when the subject tests were a thing. This was 2 years ago. But that student did really well on math. He was like a top math competition type of student in Russia. So yeah, it's not always about the SAT, but for a typical more standard student that is not like an exception, it helps to take the test. So if you can, even if you have to travel for it for like a few hours, it would be very rewarding.
Cool. Charlie, you were next.
So did the whole like COVID-19 situation affect like the legitimacy of current GPAs for students who are like on online school?
Sorry, Charlie, can you clarify a little bit more?
Well, like, so I'd say a lot of online schools, like they gave a lot of grace to students and kind of inflated grades just because the whole year was super weird. So our college is kind of looking at GPA differently now because the whole world kind of was turned upside down.
Yeah, very good question, very high level. This is something that we've observed in our results last year. So no one can tell you yes or no for that, like very confidently. So it's not a black and white answer. But like from a standpoint of a company like us, when we looked back at our data for last year for COVID, right? The students that applied and the students that got rejected and accepted, we have noticed, and especially with our admission officer, we've noticed that they did review things a little bit differently. And there was a little bit more emphasis on the extracurriculars and leadership because it could go either way. So you've brought up a very good point. You said that the grades are inflated because a lot of schools are generous and they're giving better GPAs, right? But it could also go the other way where some schools didn't do that and students' grades suffered, they plummeted. So in both cases, unfair. So that's why we've noticed that universities were a little bit more focused on your essays, a little bit more focused on your extracurriculars, even though those things were already important in the past, right? And then the biggest difference that we've noticed with COVID is that students started applying to more colleges. This one is like for everyone here, not just for Charlie. You guys probably have noticed like one of the biggest impacts of COVID is that everyone had extra time, right? And a lot of people picked up extra hobbies, online gaming, whatever. So the same thing happened with admissions. A lot of students had extra time to apply for universities worldwide. So the number of applications increased this last year. It was like a historical number for every university. If you look at every university, they had record number of applicants. So basically, that's the biggest trend that changed. People started applying to 15 or even 20 schools. 20 is the max, by the way, on the Common App. And by the way, before COVID, if you used our college counseling, we used to say, don't apply to 20. You need to focus on some essays, not a lot. So maybe apply to 10, maybe 12 max. But now we're saying apply to 20, please. You need to apply to more to keep up with the other students. So it's kind of different. It changed our like timeline of doing things as well. Now we're prepping a lot earlier with our rising seniors to work on their college applications. Very good question, Charlie. I hope I answered it.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Jerry and then Noor.
Okay, so does the age at which you take a standardized test affect its legitimacy? For example, if I take the SAT, like I'm currently a freshman right now. If I take it this summer, then will it affect the legitimacy of my test score than if I took it, say, next summer or the summer after?
No, it wouldn't make a very big difference. I'm not in a position to say yes or no like that confidently, so let me apologize for that. That is, again, that's like a very like high level question where you're a college counselor. By the way, the college counselor in Crimson, we call that person a strategist. So I'm going to say strategist moving forward. But the strategist would be the person that will kind of like give you the actual feedback about that, depending on your one-on-one situation. But in general, it doesn't make sense to me. That's why I said no, because I have students that have taken the test 4 times and their score on the very last one, like end of junior year, was the best. And they submitted that one, right? And they went to some top universities. So it's not always like, I know it makes sense to you that I took it younger, so I'm ahead of a lot of students. But in the end, when you apply to colleges, it's more about the score itself. If it's a 1500, 1550, then at that point, it doesn't matter when you took it, how many times you took it. Cool. Good question. Go ahead,
Noor.
Okay, so I was wondering, essay-wise, what are some like really general and basic topics I should avoid? Because I want to apply to really competitive schools, and I just want to know, like, when I'm writing my essays, like, what I should like totally avoid. So do you have any like tips on?
Yeah, we actually have a full webinar dedicated to the Common App and the essay writing. So like this webinar that I presented to you guys, it was more general about how to do in high school. We have one that is an hour long that's just about like the essays and the Common App. And in that one, I'm gonna refer to like a slide there. There's one slide about the most common red flags, and I'm talking about the main essay. So for the rest of you that are listening in, on the Common App, there are 2 different types of essays. The main essay that gets submitted to all the 20 schools that you potentially are aiming for. It's 20 or 10, whatever, however many you have. And then there's another essay called supplementary essay. That one, every school will ask you for 2 or 3, depending on the school. Like for example, University of Washington will ask you for 3 questions, and then U Chicago will ask you for 3 more. They're very different. So let's say you're aiming for 10 universities, you might write 30 essays by that logic. And all of them are individual, right? So Noor, I'm gonna answer your question with the main essay, the one that gets submitted to all the universities. The most common cliche topic is writing about your success. Or let's say the biggest mistake is reiterating information that is already elsewhere in the application. I'm using like a fancy way to say this, but basically, if you have mentioned a piece of information on your college application, like let's say on the activity section or the resume, or if the information is on the transcript, or if it's on the like your GPA, do not mention it in the essay, because the essay is for additional information, right? So if I'm repeating more information that is already there that they have reviewed, you've wasted a good opportunity to add something else. So that's the most common mistake. Like for example, I say in my essay, I say, and having taken 8 APs in high school really taught me how rigorous a class can be. But I've already said I have 8 APs on my transcript. So why am I wasting a sentence? The characters are limited. That's the number one most common mistake. There are a lot of other cliches that students use, like especially for like athletes. They're like, oh, that finals game when it was raining and muddy, and then they were losing by 1 point, and then he scored a goal. It's a very good story, powerful story, but it's very like repetitive. So make sure the story is fresh, like something that's very unique to you. So sometimes that means you talk about simpler things, like Noor, the time that you were lost in the mall. I'm sure that happened to all of you. And then you go to a stranger and she's not your mom, right? So that impact of that story on you. So maybe something like that, and then tying it with what you want to do. Those types of stories are the most powerful. Good question, Noor. Any other questions?
Jerry, looks like you have another question.
Right, it was the question that I remember in the test session I said there are 2 questions. I forgot one of them. So here it is. So on the SAT, on the ACT, there are writing sections in both of them. So how important is it that I take these writing questions? Essentially, are these writing sections required, or at least like, well, in college terms, highly recommended, but basically required?
Yeah, good. I like that you're referring to the test optional, because they say the test is optional, but it's highly recommended. So good. But the writing is not like that. So it really depends on the major that you're going for. So more about the major rather than anything else. There's no like curveballs or hidden information there. So if the major that you're going for would benefit from you showing your writing skills, you should take the SAT, ACT. If it doesn't, then you shouldn't take it. Don't waste time. Most likely for many majors, the answer is yes, take it, because writing is important for a lot of majors, right? So the only time that I would say don't take it is if you 100% know it doesn't relate to the major you want to go to, or you 100% know that you're really bad at writing and you're going to waste a lot of time trying to get a good score. And then again, don't waste your time at that point. There are better things you can do with your time. What's your second question, Jerry? No, go ahead. Yeah.
So basically, I should take the SAT writing section if I can.
Most likely, yeah. For a lot of majors, yes. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think we have time for one more question. And Vincent, I see your hand up again.
So like, does it matter like what school you go to, like the private schools and like public schools? Because I heard like for the top universities, like people that go to like prep schools, they get a secure spot like to those universities. Is that
no,
true?
there is no secure spot from going to a private school. Those are more like
college prep schools.
Yeah, that's like typically college prep schools do such a good job, because the whole time they're focused on prepping you for college, is that you'll naturally end up having better chances going to a top university. That's the reason. It's not a lot about money, but it's all about like what you can do, right? So simple answer, if I'm in an expensive private school, right, that has all the resources, that has all the clubs, but my mind is an entrepreneur mind, I probably won't be successful in that school, because for these private high schools, things are already existing and structured, right? So you have to be part of a club that already, like FBLA is already there and it's been there for 20 years. So there isn't much I can do to show how creative I am. Things are very rigid. So it's probably a better fit for an entrepreneurship type of mind, right? And then for a public school, if I'm the opposite, a public school won't be good for me because sometimes resources are not there and I have to create them. So again, it's all about the students and how much they've done within that school, how much they've demonstrated. It's mostly about that.
Is it true that like the people that go to the college prep schools, like more people get into like top schools than like a public school, like a small public school?
Maybe there's a little bit truth to that. A lot of it is inflated by what people say, right? But there's a little bit of truth to that because when you go to a private school, what does it mean? It means that most likely you're rich, right? And if you're rich, it most likely means when you apply to colleges, you're not going to request financial aid or apply for scholarships, most likely, right? So that means that universities will probably want to give offers. If you're a strong student still, you can't be like a weak student and just say, I have money. No, you're still a strong student. But then when I compare Vincent, who is rich and at a private school and a strong student, and I compare Bilal, who is a strong student but asking for financial aid, most likely as a university, I'm going to go with Vincent because then I can save my financial aid money and give it to a different student that actually needs it.
Okay.
So it's mostly about that, but not because of like,
So,
oh, they're
like,
rich.
money benefits them then? Like being upper class benefits them?
Slightly. If you're aiming for financial aid and the school is not known to give a lot of financial aid, then yes, money benefits them. But a lot of these top universities, they're very generous with financial aid. So it's not a
Like
very
through
big concern.
admission, like they prefer like rich people, like
No, that's a big misconception that you hear. Like the only time that is true is if my family is a billionaire and they give $1 million or millions of dollar donation to a school, then
Okay.
that would be like a benefit. But how rare is that, right? Not everyone is a billionaire. And by the way, you literally have to give millions of donations, like 50 million, 40 million, in order to potentially secure a spot at one of the universities. So it's not an easy thing to do. Okay, good question, Vincent. I know the process is very stressful. So I think you will benefit a lot from the one-on-one because you have some very good personal like questions about your own profiles that we can talk about. Cool, Katie.
Awesome. Thank you, Bilal. That was a lot of really great information. Students, he is obviously a great resource in education for using all of that for some college knowledge. Let's all unmute and say a big thank you to him.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome, you guys. You're welcome.
Yep, and you guys can find all of his contact info in Blackboard as well. All right,
Cool.
now you guys are going to go back into your company rooms for your daily debrief. I'm going to
Perfect, you
send
guys.
you back in there.
Nice meeting everyone. Thank you so much, Katie.
Yeah.
Thank you.